Dresden, April 17th, 1945. The air still tasted of ashes. Even 2 months after the bombing, Dresden didn't smell like a city. It smelled like something trying to remember how to be one. Smoke rose from the hollow buildings, slow and reluctant, like the last sighs of a dying world. 15-year-old Lucas Adler stood in the courtyard of what was left of his school. The roof was gone, windows shattered, the blackboard now a wall of soot. He was supposed to be in class. Instead, he and a dozen other boys waited in a line beneath the spring rain, shoes sinking into mud that used to be a playground. A truck arrived, green, dented, its tires coated in dust from the eastern roads. From it stepped a man in uniform, tall but hunched, the insignia on his collar torn at the edges. He held a clipboard like a weapon. "All boys over 14, he said, his voice dry as sandpaper. "Step forward." No one moved. Then Lucas did, and the others followed. The man smiled, the way men do when they've forgotten how to. "Good boys," he said. "The fatherland thanks you. The Führer thanks you." He pointed to the truck. "You'll be taken to the camp for instruction. You'll serve with honor." Lucas swallowed hard. He still wore his school jacket, torn at the sleeve, buttons missing. The fabric clung to him with the smell of chalk and smoke. His teacher, an old man named Herr Vogel, stood at the doorway saying nothing. When their eyes met, Vogel gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not know, but I can't stop this." Lucas climbed onto the truck. Inside, boys sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces pale and blank. One of them, a freckled kid with curly hair, leaned toward Lucas and whispered, "They said we're going to stop the Russians." Lucas nodded, though he didn't believe it. He had seen the leaflets that drifted down from Allied planes like snow. Maps showing the Red Army only days away. The war was already over. It just hadn't been told yet. The truck jolted forward. The boys swayed with it, silent except for the engine's cough. The city rolled by, ruins stacked like bones, statues headless, streets crawling with refugees carrying their homes and bags. At a crossroads, they passed a burned-out tram. Inside, a doll sat upright on a seat, untouched, staring through glass melted into ripples. Lucas couldn't look away. The truck stopped at a checkpoint. A young officer approached, his uniform immaculate, boots shining like mirrors. He looked too clean for this city. He checked the papers, nodded once, then leaned toward the truck bed. "Remember, boys," he said, "the world will remember you." Then he smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Be brave." The gate opened, and the truck rolled through. Lucas glanced back one last time. The schoolyard, the rain, the teacher, all fading behind the mist. He wondered if the city would still be standing when he came back. If he came back. They reached the edge of town by dusk. A cluster of wooden barracks stood beside a muddy field. The training camp. Men in gray coats waited, handing each boy a folded uniform, a helmet too large, and a Panzerfaust still warm from the factory. "Congratulations," one of them said. "You're soldiers now." Lucas held the weapon awkwardly, its weight unfamiliar, its promise heavy. It was longer than his arm, cold against his skin. He looked down the barrel, wondering how something so small could hold so much death. In the corner of the yard, a gramophone played a scratchy march, the needle skipping over a bullet hole in the record. The melody faltered, then began again, defiant, broken, relentless. That night, Lucas lay on a thin cot, staring at the wooden ceiling. He could hear the others breathing, whispering about glory, about medals, about going home heroes. He didn't join in. He just turned to the wall and whispered to himself, "Heroes don't come back." He thought of his mother, still in Dresden, living in the basement of what used to be their bakery. She had kissed his cheek before school that morning and said, "Be careful on your way." She hadn't meant to war. He closed his eyes. The image of the doll on the tram still burned behind his eyelids. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with the sound of boots, sirens, and a voice that kept repeating the same lie. "You're saving Germany." He was 15 and already chosen for a war that had nothing left to save. If you think patriotism is noble, wait until you see it used to feed children to the fire. Dresden Outskirts, April 18th, 1945. Morning came pale and colorless, a kind of light that didn't warm. Fog drifted through the barracks like a ghost that hadn't decided where to haunt yet. Lucas woke to the sound of boots on gravel and an officer's whistle slicing the quiet apart. "Up! Line up! Schnell!" The boys scrambled to their feet, pulling on uniforms that still smelled of factory dust. Each jacket carried the same insignia, an eagle stitched over a country that no longer existed. The helmets hung too low over their ears. They looked less like soldiers and more like children playing dress-up in the ruins of a dream. Outside, a loudspeaker crackled to life. A voice filled the yard, deep, rehearsed, confident. "You are the last line of defense. The enemy is at our gates, but Germany still stands. Remember your duty, your blood, your Führer." The boys stood straighter, glancing nervously at one another. Some shouted, "Heil!" out of habit. Others stayed silent, their mouths too dry for belief. Lucas just stared at the mud pooling around his boots. He had heard this voice before, on radios, in cinemas, and classrooms. It always promised victory, even as the sky fell apart. Now it just sounded tired. After the speech, they were herded into the gymnasium. The walls were covered in posters, smiling blond boys holding rifles, flags waving behind them like wings. A film projector rattled in the back, its reel trembling as it spun. On the screen, grainy footage of tanks rolling through sunny fields, soldiers laughing, women throwing flowers. A narrator spoke with a calm authority that didn't belong to reality. "The youth of the Reich stand ready to defend our sacred homeland. Their courage will outshine the darkness. Their sacrifice will inspire eternity." The film ended with applause. Only half the boys clapped. Then came the man with the chocolate. He was old, maybe 40, which seemed ancient to them. His uniform faded, medals dull. He carried a crate of chocolate bars and handed them out one by one. When he reached Lucas, he smiled, eyes hollow. "Eat," he said. "It'll keep you brave." The chocolate was hard and dry, the wrapper printed with an eagle and a flag. Lucas turned it over in his hand before taking a bite. It tasted like dust and sugar, sweet enough to hide the bitterness for a moment. Next, the man placed something else in Lucas's hands, a Panzerfaust, heavy, cold. He showed him how to aim, how to fire. He didn't show him how to live afterward. "You'll stop a tank with this," the man said. "One shot, one kill." "And if I miss?" Lucas asked quietly. The man looked at him for a long time before answering, "Then you won't have to worry about missing again." That night, the boys lay on their bunks, passing the chocolate back and forth, trading stories of home like currency. Emil, the youngest, only 14, said his father had been a pilot. He said flying felt like freedom, Emil whispered. Lucas didn't have the heart to tell him that freedom wasn't coming back. Someone joked that they'd get medals if they shot a tank. Another said, maybe they'll name a street after us. Laughter filled the room. Thin, nervous, almost brave. It sounded like children pretending the dark was just a game. Lucas didn't laugh. He opened his notebook and wrote, "They give us chocolate to make us heroes. But I think it's just so we forget to be afraid." Later, after the lights went out, Lucas couldn't sleep. He could hear the older boys snoring, the distant hum of engines, the quiet sob of someone 2 bunks away. He thought of his mother again, how she used to hum while baking bread, the smell of cinnamon filling their kitchen. Now there was no kitchen, no bread, only smoke. He reached under his pillow and felt the cold metal of the Panzerfaust resting there, a weapon heavier than he was ready to be. He whispered to the ceiling, "How many lies can fit in one country?" No one answered, only the wind moving through the cracks, carrying with it the faintest scent of spring. The next morning, orders came. Their training was over. They were to march east toward the Elbe River, where the Russians had already crossed. No one asked why. No one dared. The officer stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. He smiled the same hollow smile as yesterday. "One more mission," he said. "One more day for Germany." As they climbed into the truck, Lucas looked back at the barracks. The chocolate wrappers fluttered across the ground like tiny flags of surrender. He thought of the film reel, the smiling boys, the voice that promised eternity. And for the first time, he wondered if eternity was just another word for never growing up. They were told they'd save their country, but what they were really saving was someone else's lie. If you think faith makes men brave, wait until you see what fear makes of children. On the road to the Elbe, April 20th, 1945, they left at dawn, when the world was still gray enough to look merciful. The air smelled of wet earth and diesel, and the truck rattled as if protesting every kilometer. No one spoke for the first hour. Lucas sat in the back with 12 other boys, the Panzerfaust across his knees, his breath forming small clouds that vanished before they meant anything. The road ahead was lined with trees stripped bare by winter and war. Every branch looked like a hand reaching for something it would never touch. Emil leaned close and whispered, "Do you think we'll see real tanks?" Lucas stared at the horizon. "I hope not." Emil grinned nervously. "If I get one, I'll write my name on it." Lucas didn't answer. He just held tighter to the weapon that felt more like a curse than a promise. As the sun climbed, they began to pass people, families walking in the opposite direction, dragging carts, pushing bicycles with flat tires, children carrying bundles of bread, and nothing else. No one looked at the boys in uniform. No one saluted. A woman with a shawl over her head muttered something under her breath as they passed. Lucas didn't need to hear the words to understand them. The truck slowed for a checkpoint. A soldier waved them through, his uniform dirty, his face gray. He couldn't have been more than 20, but he looked twice that. He leaned close to Lucas as the truck rolled past and whispered, "Go home, Junge. There's nothing left to fight for." Lucas turned to watch him disappear behind them. No one else seemed to have heard. Or maybe they all pretended not to. By noon, the truck stopped near a burned-out village. They were ordered to walk the rest of the way. The officer who had led them this far climbed down from the cab, wiped his face with a dirty handkerchief, and said, "The road's too broken for vehicles. You'll continue on foot." Someone asked, "Sir, where exactly are we going?" The officer hesitated, eyes flicking toward the east. "Forward," he said, "always forward." He didn't meet their eyes again. The boys walked for hours, boots soaked, stomachs hollow. The countryside stretched out around them. Fields turned to mud, fences leaning, barns collapsed. They passed a farmhouse that still burned, smoke curling up into the sky like a last breath. Lucas began counting his steps, not to keep rhythm, but to make the distance feel smaller. 100, 200, every number a heartbeat further from home. By evening, the sky turned red, not from sunset, but from something burning far ahead. The officer said it was artillery. The boys exchanged glances. None of them had seen the front before. It looked like the end of the world. They stopped at a crossroads to rest. A man on a bicycle appeared from nowhere, thin, wild-eyed, his coat flapping open like torn paper. He shouted, "The war is over! Don't go east! The Russians are already in Torgau!" The officer raised his pistol and barked, "Get out of here!" The man vanished down the road, still shouting, "It's over! It's over!" Lucas watched until the man was gone. He wanted to believe him, but the officer's hand on the gun had made believing dangerous. Emil sat beside him, legs shaking. "He's lying," he said quickly, almost begging Lucas to agree. "Maybe," Lucas said. He didn't sound convinced. That night, they camped in the ruins of a barn. No fire, no food, just cold air and the sound of distant thunder that wasn't thunder. One of the older boys tried to joke that they'd all get medals after this. No one laughed. They just stared at the floor, each thinking the same thing, that medals were for people who came back. Lucas opened his notebook, the paper soft from his hands. He wrote by the light of a single candle stub. "We are marching east. Every step feels like walking into a story someone else already ended. The adults keep saying one more day, but I think we ran out of days a long time ago." He closed the notebook, tucked it into his coat, and lay down. Emil curled up beside him, clutching his rifle like a pillow. Lucas watched him until his breathing steadied, then whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, one of those sounds that still belonged to the world before. Lucas closed his eyes and tried to imagine home. His mother's hands dusted with flour, the smell of bread, the faint hum of the radio. But the memory wouldn't come clean anymore. It was stained with smoke. At dawn, they were woken by the sound of trucks, not German. Engines deeper, heavier. The officer shouted for them to grab their weapons. The boys scrambled to their feet, half asleep, half awake, fully terrified. The sound grew louder, closer, then silence, only the wind. Then one shell. The ground shook. A distant explosion bloomed on the horizon. The officer's voice broke. "They found us! Prepare your positions!" Lucas's hands trembled as he picked up the Panzerfaust. He thought of what the man back in Dresden had said. One shot, one kill. But the voice in his head whispered something else entirely. One shot, one ending. He looked at Emil, whose face was pale under the helmet, eyes wide. "Do you think we'll live through this?" Emil asked. Lucas forced a smile he didn't feel. "Let's just live through today." They called it marching to the front. But it felt more like being carried by history to a place that didn't want them. If you think courage is learned, wait until you see how fast fear teaches. Near the Elbe River, April 21st, 1945, the road ended before the war did. The officer led them through a cluster of birch trees into a wide field where an old farmhouse leaned against the wind. Half the roof was gone, one wall black with soot. A rusted weather vane creaked above the barn, a rooster turning in circles, forever pointing nowhere. "This is it," the officer said. He sounded less like a commander and more like someone admitting a secret. He ordered them to spread out, dig trenches, and prepare for enemy armor. But there was nothing to prepare with, just mud, fear, and a handful of anti-tank weapons they barely knew how to use. Lucas felt the ground with his hands. Cold, wet, the kind of earth that clings to you as if refusing to let go. He dug anyway, because orders were easier than questions. By midday, the officer had disappeared. No one saw him leave. One moment he was barking commands, the next there was only his empty pistol holster hanging on a nail in the barn. "Where'd he go?" Emil asked, voice thin. No one answered. Lucas kept digging until the spade hit rock. He stared at the dirt under his fingernails and said quietly, "He's not coming back." They ate what was left of their rations, a crust of bread, a sip of stale water. The air smelled of rain and burnt diesel. In the distance, thunder rolled again, only this time it wasn't the sky. Fritz, a lanky boy from Leipzig, climbed onto the roof to look. He came down pale. "They're coming," he whispered. "Tanks! Dozens!" No one moved, no one breathed. As the day bled into evening, Lucas found a corner of the barn that was dry enough to sit. He pulled out his notebook and wrote with trembling hands, "The officer's gone. Maybe he knew what we didn't, that this isn't a mission. It's a grave with instructions." He paused, the pencil hovering above the page. Emil sat beside him, head on his knees. "I don't want to be brave anymore," the boy murmured. "You don't have to be," Lucas said. Emil looked up, eyes glassy. "Then what do I have to be?" "Alive," Lucas said. "Just be alive." Outside, wind swept across the fields, carrying the distant rumble of engines. Each minute it grew louder. The boys stood in a line beside the barn, clutching their weapons, the metal cold, slick with sweat. Lucas adjusted the Panzerfaust on his shoulder. It felt absurd, like holding a piece of history that didn't belong to him. The weapon weighed almost as much as he did. "Remember," Fritz said shakily, "aim for the tracks. They said it's easiest to hit that way." Lucas nodded, though he knew none of them would get close enough to try. Then the first tank appeared on the horizon. Dark, slow, steady. Its engine growled like something alive. Behind it, others followed, shadows swallowing the distance. The boys crouched, waiting for the order that would never come. Emil whispered, "Now?" Lucas shook his head. "Wait." Another tank. Then another. The ground trembled under their boots. Birds fled the trees in a sudden burst of panic. And then a voice, not German, shouting commands in Russian. The tanks fired. The field exploded in sound and light. The barn shuddered. Windows shattered. Flames leapt from the roof like the building itself was trying to escape. Lucas threw himself into the dirt, ears ringing, vision white. Someone screamed. Someone else didn't finish. He rolled over, fumbling for the Panzerfaust. The safety stuck. His hands slipped on the mud. He looked up and saw a tank less than 50 meters away, the red star gleaming on its side. Its cannon turned slowly toward him. He didn't think. He just fired. The weapon kicked back like a punch from God. The blast knocked him flat, the sound swallowed by the roar of impact. Through the haze, he saw fire bloom along the tank's track. It slowed. Then the next one fired, and the world vanished again. When he came to, it was quiet. The air was thick with smoke and the sweet metallic scent of burnt earth. The barn was gone. So were most of the boys. He tried to stand, but his body refused. Pain radiated from his shoulder, his ears filled with ringing. He turned his head and saw Emil lying nearby, motionless, the Panzerfaust still clutched in his small hands. Lucas crawled toward him, dragging himself through mud and ash. He touched the boy's sleeve gently. No response. He wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Only the sound, that small, broken sound a person makes when there's nothing left to say. A shape appeared through the smoke, a Soviet soldier, rifle raised. He was young too, maybe 20, eyes dark and tired. He shouted something Lucas didn't understand, then stopped when he saw the boy's face, the size of his hands, the youth in his eyes. The soldier lowered his rifle. He stepped closer, crouched beside him, and in broken German said, "You're just a child." Lucas stared at him, unable to answer. The soldier hesitated, then took off his coat and placed it over Lucas's shoulders. "Stay," he said softly. "Stay alive." Then he stood and walked away, his shadow disappearing into the smoke. Lucas lay there for a long time, the coat heavy around him, the notebook pressed against his chest. He reached inside, tore out a page, and wrote with shaking hands, "They told us this was for glory, but glory burns too. We were 15 and already doomed." He folded the page once, twice, and tucked it into Emil's hand. Night fell. Rain began to fall, soft, steady, almost kind. The flames hissed as they died. Lucas closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he didn't dream of orders or tanks. He dreamed of bread and the smell of home and a sky that wasn't red. The war ended for Germany that week, but for its children, it ended here, in a field where belief met truth and only silence survived. If you think the end of a war brings peace, ask the ones who had to grow old remembering how it sounded. Elbe River Front, April 22nd, 1945. When Lucas opened his eyes again, the world was gray, not smoke gray after gray, the kind that comes when fire has burned itself out and nothing is left to eat. He tried to move. His arms screamed, his ribs ached, his mouth tasted of iron and dirt. The soldier's coat still lay across him, heavy and warm despite the rain. It smelled of oil, earth, and something human, a smell he hadn't realized he'd missed. The sky was pale and wide. Somewhere, a single bird was singing, as if it hadn't been told the war was still on. Lucas lay there listening, afraid to breathe too loudly in case the world started again. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. When he finally pushed himself upright, the field looked unrecognizable. Smoke drifted low over blackened grass. The barn was a skeleton. Bodies, some small, some still clutching weapons too big for them, were scattered like forgotten thoughts. Lucas's hand brushed against something cold. He looked down. Emil's Panzerfaust split clean in half, and beside it, Emil himself, eyes closed, face almost peaceful. The page Lucas had left in his hand was gone, blown away by the wind. He knelt there, not knowing what to say, not sure words mattered anymore. Then softly, he whispered, "You made it home, Emil, just not the way we wanted." By afternoon, the tanks were gone. The Soviets had moved on toward Berlin. Lukas was alone. The silence felt heavier than any bombardment. He found his notebook in the mud. The cover was torn, pages soaked and smeared, but still intact, like something too stubborn to die. He pressed it against his chest and began to walk. No direction, just away. For 2 days, Lukas wandered through villages that weren't villages anymore, houses burned down to their basements, church bells twisted and melted. In one square, he saw a sign nailed to a door. Peace declared. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Peace felt like a word from a different language. A group of refugees found him on the 3rd day. Women, children, a man missing half his leg. They gave him water, a crust of bread, a blanket. One woman asked, "Where's your unit?" He almost said gone, but the word got stuck in his throat. He just looked toward the horizon. Weeks later, he made it back to Dresden. The city was still a skeleton, but the fires were out. He found the ruins of his mother's bakery. Only the oven left standing, a black mouth open to the sky. Neighbors told him she had been evacuated days before the bombing. No one knew where she'd gone. He sat in the middle of the rubble and opened his notebook again. With the last stub of his pencil, he wrote, "The war is over, but I am still 15. I don't know what to do with that." He tore out the page and tucked it under a stone, then closed the book and held it to his chest until his heartbeat felt like someone else's. Time jump. Germany, 1960. The bakery was rebuilt by then, not his, but someone's. New walls, new paint, new owners. Lukas stood across the street, watching children run past with pastries in their hands, laughing. The city was alive again. The war, a rumor whispered in history lessons. He carried the same notebook, now brittle and yellowed, bound with string. Inside, the words had faded, but the feeling had not. That night, he returned to the field by the river. It took him a full day to find it, overgrown now, quiet, nothing to mark what had happened there. The grass swayed gently in the breeze. The sky was blue, clear, a sky too kind for memory. He knelt in the same spot where the barn once stood and opened the notebook to the first page. The handwriting of a child stared back at him, crooked, uncertain, hopeful. He read aloud, "They told us we were fighting for Germany. But maybe Germany was just fighting for a chance to forget." He closed the book. Then he dug a small hole and placed it inside, wrapping it in the old Russian coat he had kept all these years. "Thank you," he murmured, to the soldier, to Emil, to the silence itself. When he stood, the wind carried the scent of wheat and rain. Birds circled overhead. Life had returned to the place where his childhood had died. He whispered one last line to the field before walking away. We were 15, and that was old enough to be forgotten. They called it Germany's final mission. But it wasn't a mission. It was a sacrifice written in children's handwriting. History remembers the generals, the tanks, the flags. But somewhere, beneath a quiet field by the Elbe, lie the words of a boy who wanted nothing but to go home. And maybe that's what all wars are. Grown men's decisions, paid for in children's dreams. He never fought again. He never stopped hearing the sound of that barn collapsing, and for the rest of his life, when he saw young boys marching in neat rows, he felt the same cold thought echo inside him. They don't know how quickly a uniform can turn a heartbeat into history.